In a small town surrounded by green hills and winding rivers, there lived an elderly couple named Margaret and Harold. Their home was a cozy little house with a creaky wooden porch and flower boxes that burst with color every spring. For 50 years they had shared this space, filling it with laughter, quiet conversations, and the occasional argument. But what truly defined their life together was the deep bond they shared. A love so steady it felt like the rhythm of the earth itself. Margaret was a kind woman with soft gray hair, always tied neatly in a bun. Her hands, though now wrinkled and spotted with age, still moved with purpose as she cooked meals or tended to her garden. Harold, on the other hand, was a tall man whose once broad shoulders had grown slightly stooped over the years. His face carried lines etched by time, but his eyes remained bright, often crinkling at the corners when he smiled. Together, they were a picture of simplicity and devotion, living day by day with gratitude for the little things. Every year, without fail, the couple celebrated their wedding anniversary at the same diner tucked away on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, just a modest place with checkered tablecloths and walls adorned with faded photographs of the town's history, but it held a special place in their hearts. The owner knew them well and always saved their favorite table by the window, where sunlight streamed in during the day and the streetlights cast a warm glow at night. Each visit was marked by hearty plates of food, laughter, and stories about the past. To Margaret and Harbor, these dinners weren't just meals. They were rituals, reminders of the vows they'd made all those years ago. But this year was different. Life had thrown its share of challenges their way, and money was tighter than ever before. Harold's pension checks barely covered the essentials, and Margaret's recent health issues meant frequent trips to the doctor, leaving them with little room for luxuries. As their golden anniversary approached, both tried to hide their worries from each other, but the weight of their financial struggles lingered like a shadow over their home. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Margaret sat at the kitchen table folding laundry. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. She glanced at Harold, who was staring out the window with a distant look in his eyes. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle yet tinged with resignation. "Harold," she said, smoothing out a shirt, "maybe we don't need dinner this year. We could stay here instead. Just sit together, talk about old times, and enjoy each other's company." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Harold didn't respond. He turned to look at her, his gaze softening as he took in her familiar features, the curve of her smile, the way her hands worked methodically even after all these years. After a pause, he shook his head firmly. "No, Maggie," he replied, his voice steady despite the lump forming in his throat. "Our 50th deserves something special. I'll figure it out." Though his words sounded confident, Harold spent many sleepless nights worrying about how to make that promise come true. During the day, he put on a brave face, pretending everything was fine. But late at night, when Margaret was asleep, he would lie awake staring at the ceiling, calculating numbers in his head. How could they afford even a simple meal at the diner? The thought gnawed at him, making his chest feel tight. Yet he refused to let Margaret see his distress. If anyone deserved a celebration, it was her. The woman who had stood by him through thick and thin, who had laughed with him in joy and cried with him in sorrow. Unbeknownst to Harold, Margaret was carrying her own burden. She hated seeing him, stressed and wished she could ease his worries somehow. One afternoon, while Harold was out running errands, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Sitting at the computer, a device she rarely used, she began listing some of her most cherished belongings online. A vintage necklace passed down from her mother, a set of delicate porcelain figurines collected over decades, and a beautifully embroidered quilt she'd made years ago. Though parting with these items pained her deeply, she convinced herself it was worth it if it meant giving Harold peace of mind. Days passed, and the responses trickled in. Some offers came close to what she hoped for, but most were disappointingly low. Still, Margaret persisted, determined to contribute however she could. She kept her efforts hidden from Harold, tucking the emails away and deleting notifications before he could see them. But no matter how hard she tried, the amount she managed to gather fell short of what they needed. Frustration bubbled inside her, mixed with guilt for not being able to do more. Meanwhile, Harold had taken up odd jobs around the neighborhood, hoping to earn a bit of extra cash. He mowed lawns, fixed broken fences, and helped neighbors carry groceries. Though grateful for the work, he couldn't shake off the feeling of inadequacy. At 75, he wasn't as strong or fast as he used to be, and some tasks left him exhausted. Yet, he pushed through, driven by the desire to give Margaret the celebration she deserved. Every coin he earned went into a small jar hidden in the top drawer of his dresser, slowly adding up to something meaningful. Or so he hoped. As the days counted down to their anniversary, tension filled the air, though neither voiced it. They continued their daily routines, pretending everything was normal. Margaret baked pies and tidied up the house while Harold tinkered with tools in the garage, trying to fix a broken chair he thought might fetch a good price. Despite their efforts, the looming question remained unanswered. How would they celebrate? 50 years of marriage when every penny mattered? On the morning of their anniversary, Harold woke up earlier than usual. He dressed carefully, choosing his best shirt and trousers, and polished his shoes until they gleamed. Margaret did the same, wearing a dress she hadn't touched in years and pinning her hair back with care. When they stood side by side in front of the mirror, they looked at each other and smiled, a bittersweet expression that carried both pride and sadness. No matter what happened today, they reminded themselves they had each other. And perhaps, in the end, that was enough. With hesitant steps, they made their way to the diner, holding hands tightly as if drawing strength from one another. The autumn breeze rustled the leaves above them, scattering golden hues across the path. The world seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Little did they know, their journey to the diner would lead to an encounter that would change everything, not just for this day but for the rest of their lives. As Margaret and Harold walked hand in hand toward the diner, their steps were slow but steady. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the sound of distant birdsong added a gentle melody to their quiet journey. Though they tried to keep their spirits up, the weight of their financial struggles lingered in the back of their minds. Harold kept glancing at Margaret, his heart heavy with guilt for not being able to give her the celebration she deserved. Margaret, sensing his unease, squeezed his hand reassuringly, though she too felt a pang of sadness. When they reached the diner, the familiar sight of its red brick exterior and the faded sign above the door brought a wave of nostalgia. It was more than just a place to eat. It was where they had shared countless memories over the years. The hostess greeted them warmly as soon as they stepped inside, her smile lighting up the cozy space. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she said cheerfully. "Your table is ready, right by the window." Harold nodded, forcing a smile as he followed her to their usual spot. The table was set with clean checkered cloths and gleaming cutlery, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. As they settled into their seats, Margaret opened the menu, her eyes scanning the items with a mix of longing and hesitation. She knew the prices by heart, having dined here so many times before, but today every number seemed impossibly high. Harold watched her quietly, noticing the way her fingers traced the edges of the menu without landing on anything specific. "Why, don't you order your favorite?" Harold suggested, trying to sound lighthearted. "The chicken pot pie, remember? You always loved that." Margaret looked up at him, her lips curving into a small smile. "And what about you?" she asked gently. "What are you going to have?" Harold hesitated, his gaze dropping to the menu. He hadn't planned this far ahead, knowing full well that even splitting the cost of one meal would stretch their budget thin. Still, he didn't want Margaret to worry. "I think I'll go with the soup," he said finally, pointing to the cheapest option on the list. "It's hearty enough, and I've been craving it lately." Margaret nodded slowly, though her eyes betrayed her understanding of the situation. She wanted to argue, to insist that they both deserved something better, but she held her tongue. Instead, she focused on the positive. The fact that they were here together, celebrating 50 years of love and partnership, that alone was worth more than any meal. Before they could call the waiter over to place their orders, the door to the diner swung open, drawing everyone's attention. A tall man entered, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket. His presence immediately commanded the room, not because he demanded attention, but because there was an undeniable aura of kindness and humility around him. Some patrons recognized him instantly. Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star known for his roles in action-packed films and heartfelt dramas, but others simply noticed the warmth in his smile as he scanned the room. Keanu's eyes landed on Margaret and Harold almost immediately. There was something about the elderly couple that caught his interest. The way they sat close together, their hands linked tightly, their faces etched with lines of age yet glowing with affection. He approached their table cautiously, not wanting to intrude but feeling drawn to them all the same. "Excuse me," Keanu said softly, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I couldn't help but notice you two look like you have quite the story to tell." Harold looked up, startled by the stranger's sudden appearance. For a moment, he didn't recognize the man standing before him. Margaret, however, gasped softly, her eyes widening in surprise. "Oh my goodness," she murmured, her cheeks flushing pink. "Aren't you?" Keanu chuckled, nodding slightly. "Yes, ma'am, I am. But please don't let that stop you from enjoying your evening." He extended his hand toward Harold, who hesitated briefly before shaking it. "I'm Keanu. And you are?" "I'm Harold," the older man replied, still unsure of what to make of the situation. "And this is my wife, Margaret. It's lovely to meet you both," Keanu said sincerely, pulling out a chair to sit down without waiting for an invitation. His ease put the couple at ease, and Margaret found herself smiling despite her earlier worries. "So tell me," Keanu continued, leaning forward slightly, "what brings you here tonight?" Margaret glanced at Harold, then back at Keanu. "We're celebrating our 50th anniversary," she admitted, her voice tinged with pride. 50 years of marriage. Keanu's eyebrows shot up in admiration. "Wow," he said, genuinely impressed. "That's incredible. Congratulations to you both." He paused, studying their faces intently. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you two meet?" The question sparked a memory so vivid that Margaret's eyes lit up. "At a county fair," she began, her tone growing animated. "I was helping my mother sell jams and preserves at a stall, and Harold came by pretending to be interested in buying some. But really he just wanted to talk to me." Harold chuckled, remembering the moment clearly. "I was nervous," he admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "I didn't know what to say, so I asked her to dance instead. Thankfully, she said yes." Keanu grinned, clearly enjoying the story. "That's wonderful," he said. "And here you are, 50 years later, still dancing through life together." Margaret laughed softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Something like that," she replied, squeezing Harold's hand under the table. The conversation flowed naturally after that, with Keanu asking thoughtful questions and listening intently to their answers. They told him about their early days of marriage, raising children, overcoming hardships, and finding joy in the simplest moments. Each story painted a picture of a life filled with love, resilience, and unwavering commitment. As they spoke, the atmosphere in the diner shifted subtly. Other patrons began to take notice of the unlikely trio sharing such an intimate moment. Some whispered among themselves, while others simply watched with smiles on their faces. Even the staff seemed captivated, pausing occasionally to glance at the table where laughter and warmth radiated like a beacon. Unbeknownst to Margaret and Harold, Keanu had excused himself briefly during their conversation to speak with the diner's manager. When he returned, he resumed his seat as if nothing had happened, continuing to engage the couple with his charm and curiosity. By the time dessert arrived, a slice of apple pie for Margaret and a scoop of vanilla ice cream for Harold, the entire diner felt like it was part of their celebration. Though neither Margaret nor Harold realized it yet, Keanu's gesture had already begun to unfold. What started as a simple act of kindness was about to transform their evening, and perhaps their lives, in ways they could never have imagined. The conversation between Keanu, Margaret, and Harold continued to flow effortlessly, like a gentle stream weaving through rocks. Each story they shared seemed to deepen the connection between them, even though they were strangers brought together by chance. Margaret recounted the time Harold had accidentally locked himself out of the house during a snowstorm, forcing him to spend the night in the shed. "He was so stubborn," she said with a chuckle, "that he refused to wake me up and ask for help. By morning his toes were blue." Harold laughed along with her, shaking his head at the memory. "I didn't want to bother you," he explained, his tone laced with mock seriousness. "Besides, I thought I could tough it out." Keanu leaned back in his chair, his expression one of pure delight. "Sounds like you've both had your fair share of adventures," he remarked, "and here I am complaining about traffic or bad Wi-Fi." His comment drew laughter from the couple, easing any lingering nerves they might have felt about speaking with someone so famous. As the evening wore on, Keanu asked more questions, each one revealing another layer of their life together. They spoke about their children, how proud they were of their accomplishments, and the grandchildren who lit up their world with boundless energy. They talked about the challenges, too. Harold's struggle to find work after losing his job years ago, and Margaret's battle with arthritis that made even simple tasks difficult. Through it all, their love for each other shone brightly, unwavering despite the storms they'd weathered. At one point, Margaret glanced toward the counter where the waiter stood patiently, waiting to take their order. She hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt the moment to place their modest request. Sensing her concern, Keanu waved dismissively. "Don't worry about ordering just yet," he said warmly. "We're not done talking. There's still so much I want to hear." His words eased Margaret's guilt, and she relaxed into the conversation once more. For the first time that day, she forgot about the cost of the meal or the sacrifices they'd made to be there. Instead, she focused on the joy of sharing their story with someone who truly seemed interested. It wasn't every day that a Hollywood star sat across from you, hanging on to your every word as if it mattered deeply. While the trio laughed and reminisced, the rest of the diner began to feel the ripple effect of their interaction. Patrons, who had initially been curious about Keanu's presence, now found themselves drawn to the warmth emanating from the table by the window. A young couple seated nearby exchanged glances, smiling at the sight of Margaret and Harold holding hands. An elderly man at the counter sipped his coffee slowly, nodding approvingly as he listened to snippets of their conversation. Even the staff moved with extra care, refilling glasses and clearing plates quietly, not wanting to disturb the magic unfolding before them. Unbeknownst to anyone except the manager, Keanu had stepped away briefly earlier to make arrangements. He hadn't wanted to interrupt the flow of the evening, so he kept his actions discreet. When he returned, he resumed his seat as though nothing had happened, but the subtle change in the air hinted at something special brewing beneath the surface. Eventually, the topic turned to dreams and aspirations. Keanu asked what they hoped for in the future, given everything they'd already achieved. Margaret looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. "I think we just hope to keep going like this," she said softly. "To stay healthy, to see our family grow, and maybe take one last big trip somewhere warm. Somewhere we can sit by the ocean and watch the sunset without worrying about anything else." Her words hung in the air, filled with quiet, longing. Harold nodded in agreement, adding, "We've always talked about visiting Hawaii, but—" He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. The unspoken truth was clear. They couldn't afford such a dream, not anymore. Keanu's expression softened, his eyes reflecting a mix of admiration and empathy. "That sounds beautiful," he said sincerely. "You two deserve every bit of happiness the world has to offer." He paused, glancing around the room as if gathering his thoughts. Then, with a mischievous smile, he stood up and addressed the entire diner. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying just enough volume to draw everyone's attention. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, Forks froze halfway to mouths, and heads turned toward the source of the interruption. Keanu gestured toward Margaret and Harold, who looked startled by the sudden spotlight. Tonight I've had the privilege of meeting two extraordinary people who remind us all what true love looks like. 50 years together. That's no small feat. Let's give a round of applause for Harold and Margaret, celebrating 50 beautiful years of marriage. The room erupted into cheers and applause, the sound filling the cozy space with an overwhelming sense of celebration. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears while Harold blinked rapidly, clearly overwhelmed. They weren't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. As the clapping continued, some patrons whistled, others stood up to get a better look, and a few wiped away their own tears touched by the moment. When the noise finally subsided, Keanu returned to his seat, grinning broadly. "I hope you don't mind me making a bit of a fuss," he said apologetically. "But moments like these shouldn't go unnoticed." Margaret shook her head, her voice trembling as she replied, "Thank you. This is more than we ever expected." Before either of them could say another word, the waiter approached their table carrying 3 steaming plates of food. "Compliments of the house," he announced with a wink, setting down dishes piled high with their favorite meals. Harold's chicken pot pie smelled heavenly, while Margaret's slice of apple pie glistened invitingly under a drizzle of caramel sauce. There was even a plate of ribs for Keanu, who thanked the waiter graciously. As they began eating, the mood shifted again, this time to one of pure contentment. Every bite tasted richer than usual, not because of the food itself but because of the emotions swirling around them. For the first time in weeks, Harold felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Margaret savored each forkful of pie, letting the sweetness linger on her tongue. And Keanu watched them both, his heart swelling with gratitude for the opportunity to witness such genuine love. The evening stretched on, filled with laughter, stories, and occasional bursts of applause from fellow diners whenever Keanu raised his glass in tribute to the couple. What started as a modest attempt to mark 50 years of marriage had transformed into something far greater, a celebration of resilience, kindness, and the enduring power of human connection. Yet, as magical as the night had become, neither Margaret nor Harold realized that Keanu's generosity was only beginning. Little did they know the best part of their evening, and perhaps their lives, was still yet to come. As the evening unfolded, the diner buzzed with an energy that felt almost magical. The clinking of silverware against plates, the hum of cheerful chatter, and the occasional burst of laughter created a symphony of warmth. Margaret and Harold sat at their table, still holding hands, their faces glowing with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. They had entered the diner quietly, burdened by worries about money and their ability to celebrate properly, but now they were surrounded by joy, a joy that seemed to radiate from every corner of the room. Keanu remained seated with them, his presence adding a touch of wonder to the night. He wasn't just a famous actor anymore. He was a friend who had taken the time to listen, to laugh, and to honor their story. His questions kept coming, each one peeling back another layer of their lives. "What's the secret?" he asked suddenly, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "How do you stay together for 50 years? What's your trick?" Margaret glanced at Harold, her lips curving into a soft smile. "I don't think there's a trick," she admitted after a moment. "It's about choosing each other even when things get hard. We've had our share of arguments, but we always found our way back." Harold nodded in agreement, his voice steady as he added, "And forgiveness. Lots of forgiveness. Sometimes it's easier to hold on to anger than to let it go. But if you love someone enough, you find a way to move past it." Keanu listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "That's beautiful," he said finally. "Choosing each other, forgiving each other, it sounds simple, but I imagine it's not always easy." "No, it's not," Margaret replied, her tone tinged with both wisdom and humility. "But it's worth it, every single day." Their words resonated deeply with everyone in the diner, including Keanu himself. Though he was known for his humility and kindness, he couldn't help but feel inspired by the couple's unwavering commitment to one another. In a world often dominated by fleeting connections and instant gratification, Margaret and Harold stood as a testament to the power of patience, understanding, and unconditional love. As dessert plates were cleared away, the manager approached their table with a broad smile. "On behalf of everyone here," he said warmly, "thank you for letting us be part of your special night. And thank you," he added, turning to Keanu, "for reminding us what true generosity looks like." The staff gathered around, clapping softly as the manager presented Margaret and Harold with a small bouquet of flowers wrapped in ribbon. It was a humble gesture, but it carried immense meaning, a token of appreciation from strangers who had been touched by their story. Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes as she accepted the bouquet, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This means more than you know." Harold placed a reassuring hand on hers, his own eyes glistening. For all their struggles, for all the sacrifices they'd made, this moment made everything worth it. They hadn't needed expensive gifts or grand gestures to feel celebrated. They simply needed people who cared enough to acknowledge their journey. Before long, the diner began to empty as patrons finished their meals and headed home. Some stopped by Margaret and Harold's table on their way out, offering kind words and congratulations. A young woman with 2 children in tow handed Margaret a small handmade card decorated with glitter and stickers. "Happy anniversary," she said shyly before hurrying off. The card read, "Love lasts forever," written in uneven letters, likely crafted by little hands. Margaret pressed it to her chest, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. As the crowd thinned, Keanu leaned back in his chair, watching the scene unfold with a quiet smile. He knew the evening wasn't over. Not yet. Earlier, during his brief conversation with the manager, he had arranged something special. Now, as the noise settled into a peaceful lull, he decided it was time to reveal the final piece of his surprise. Standing up once again, Keanu addressed Margaret and Harold directly. "There's something I want to give you," he said softly, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "It's nothing much, but I hope it helps bring some of your dreams to life." Margaret and Harold exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what to expect. When Keanu handed them the envelope, Harold hesitated for a moment before opening it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note on elegant stationery, along with a gift card bearing a staggering amount. The note read, "To Harold and Margaret, congratulations on 50 incredible years together. Your love is a beacon of hope and inspiration to us all. May this small token help you create even more beautiful memories in the years to come. With admiration and respect, Keanu." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Their eyes scanned the note repeatedly as if trying to process its meaning. Then Harold looked up at Keanu, his voice shaking. We can't accept this," he stammered. "It's too generous." "Yes, you can," Keanu replied firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You've given so much to each other and to those around you. Let me give something back." Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "This changes everything." Indeed, it did. The gift card represented more than just financial relief. It symbolized possibility. With it, they could finally take that trip to Hawaii they'd dreamed of, sit by the ocean, and watch the sunset without worrying about anything else. It gave them permission to dream again, to believe that their golden years could still hold moments of magic. As the reality sank in, Keanu stood up, preparing to leave. "Take care of each other," he said warmly, shaking Harold's hand and giving Margaret a gentle hug. "And never stop telling your story. It's a gift to the world." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, waving goodbye to the remaining staff and patrons. As he stepped outside, the cool night air greeted him, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. He paused for a moment, glancing back at the diner where laughter and warmth continued to glow through the windows. Smiling to himself, he climbed into his car and drove off, knowing he had played a small part in making someone's dream come true. Back inside, Margaret and Harold sat in silence for a while, holding the envelope tightly between them. The diner grew quieter, the staff tidying up for the night, but neither of them noticed. All they could focus on was the realization that their 50th anniversary had become something far greater than they ever imagined. A celebration of love, resilience, and the kindness of strangers. Finally, Harold broke the silence. "Maggie," he said softly, his voice filled with awe, "we're going to Hawaii." Margaret laughed through her tears, nodding vigorously. "Yes, Harold. Yes, we are." As they left the diner hand in hand, stepping into the crisp night air, under a sky dotted with stars, they felt lighter somehow, as though the weight of their struggles had been lifted. Their hearts overflowed with gratitude, not just for the unexpected blessings of the evening, but for the 50 years of love that had brought them here. And as they walked home together, bathed in moonlight, they knew this was a memory they would cherish forever. The walk home from the diner felt different for Margaret and Harold. The same path they had taken countless times before now seemed transformed, as if the very air around them carried a new kind of magic. The autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the cool breeze brushed against their faces, but it wasn't just the season that made everything feel special. It was the weightlessness in their hearts. For the first time in what felt like ages, they weren't burdened by worries about money or the future. Instead, they were wrapped in a warm glow of gratitude and wonder. Margaret clutched the envelope Keanu had given them tightly in her hand, as though afraid it might disappear if she let go. Every few steps, she glanced down at it, her lips curving into an involuntary smile. "Can you believe this, Harold?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "He didn't even know us, and he did all of this." Harold nodded, his own thoughts swirling like the fallen leaves scattered across the sidewalk. "I don't think I'll ever understand why," he admitted, his tone thoughtful. "But maybe we're not meant to. Maybe some people are just put in our lives to remind us that there's still good in the world." Margaret squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "Well, tonight reminded me of something else too," she said, her voice softening. "It reminded me how lucky I am to have you. 50 years, Harold. 50 years of choosing each other every single day." Harold stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression tender. "And I'd choose you again tomorrow, Maggie," he replied, his voice steady despite the lump forming in his throat. "No matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, I'll always choose you." They stood there for a moment under the dim glow of a street lamp, the world around them, fading into the background. In that quiet exchange, they found themselves transported back to the early days of their marriage. The nervous excitement, the unspoken promises, the certainty that they were meant to be together. Time may have etched lines into their faces and slowed their steps, but their love remained unchanged, a steady flame burning brightly through the years. When they finally reached their front porch, Margaret hesitated before opening the door. "Let's sit out here for a while," she suggested, motioning toward the wooden swing that hung from the ceiling of the porch. It was one of their favorite spots, a place where they often sat together after dinner to watch the sun dip below the horizon. Tonight, though, the view seemed more breathtaking than usual, bathed in the silvery light of the moon. They settled onto the swing, its familiar creak providing a comforting rhythm as they rocked gently back and forth. Margaret leaned her head against Harold's shoulder, savoring the warmth of his presence. "Do you remember when we first moved here?" she asked, her voice carrying a nostalgic lilt. "This house was so empty, and I kept wondering if we'd ever fill it with enough memories to make it feel like home." Harold chuckled, recalling those early days vividly. "You spent weeks unpacking boxes while I tried, and failed, to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen," he said, shaking his head at the memory. "But somehow we managed to turn this little house into exactly what we needed." "And more," Margaret added, her gaze drifting toward the flower boxes lining the railing. Each bloom had been planted with care, a reflection of the life they had built together. Even during the toughest times, when bills piled up or health issues loomed large, they had always found ways to nurture their home and each other. For a long while, they sat in comfortable silence, letting the peacefulness of the night wash over them. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bark of a dog. It was a rare moment of stillness, a chance to simply be without worrying about anything else. But eventually, Harold broke the calm with a question that had been lingering in his mind since leaving the diner. "What do you think we should do first with what Keanu gave us?" he asked cautiously, unsure of how Margaret would respond. "We could start planning that trip to Hawaii like you've always wanted. Or maybe we shouldn't rush into anything," Margaret interrupted gently, placing a hand on his arm. "Let's take our time, Harold. This isn't just about ticking off dreams. It's about enjoying the journey. Let's savor this feeling for a little longer." Harold nodded slowly, realizing she was right. The gift wasn't just a means to an end. It was a reminder that they deserved happiness, that their love mattered, and that it was okay to dream again. They didn't need to rush to check items off a list. They could let the possibilities unfold naturally, just as their life together had done over the past 50 years. As the hours passed and the night grew deeper, Margaret finally stirred, stretching her arms above her head. "We should probably go inside," she said reluctantly, rising from the swing. "It's getting late, and these old bones aren't as forgiving as they used to be." Harold followed suit, helping her step carefully over the threshold. Inside, the house was dark and quiet, but it didn't feel lonely. On the contrary, it felt alive with memories. The laughter of children echoing through the halls, the aroma of Sunday roasts wafting from the kitchen, the whispered conversations shared late at night. Each room told a story, a chapter in the book of their lives. Margaret placed the envelope on the mantel above the fireplace, positioning it so it caught the faint glow of the moonlight streaming through the window. "There," she said with satisfaction. "That way we'll see it every morning when we wake up. A little reminder of how far we've come." Harold smiled, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "And how much farther we have to go," he added, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Here's to 50 more years, Maggie, if we're lucky enough to have them." She turned in his embrace, her eyes glistening with tears. "Even if we're not lucky enough for 50 more," she whispered, "tonight showed me that 50 years is already a lifetime worth celebrating." They stood there for a moment, holding each other close, their hearts full of gratitude. Though the evening had begun with uncertainty and worry, it had ended with joy, kindness, and a renewed sense of hope. As they climbed the stairs to bed, hand in hand, they knew that this anniversary would remain etched in their minds forever. Not because of the gifts or applause, but because of the profound reminder that love, resilience, and human connection could transform even the simplest moments into something extraordinary. In the days that followed, word of their encounter spread throughout the town. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate them, sharing stories of their own anniversaries and offering advice for their upcoming trip. Strangers approached them at the grocery store, thanking them for inspiring others to cherish their loved ones. Margaret and Harold accepted the attention graciously, humbled by the impact their story had on those around them. But amidst the whirlwind of attention, they never lost sight of what truly mattered: each other. Whether sitting side by side on the porch swing, flipping through photo albums, or quietly holding hands during church services, they continued to celebrate their love in small, meaningful ways. And as they began making plans for their Hawaiian getaway, a dream they once thought impossible, they couldn't help but marvel at how life had a way of surprising them when they least expected it. Their journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. Margaret and Harold had learned that love, no matter how tested by time or circumstance, could shine brighter than ever when met with kindness and generosity. And for that, they would be forever grateful. Weeks passed since the unforgettable evening at the diner, and life in the small town carried on as usual. The leaves turned from vibrant shades of orange and red to a carpet of brown on the ground, signaling the arrival of winter. Margaret and Harold's days returned to their quiet rhythm. Morning coffee by the window, afternoons spent tending to their garden or reading old books, and evenings curled up together watching television. Yet something had shifted within them. Their hearts felt lighter, their spirits brighter, as though the kindness they had experienced that night had planted seeds of hope that continued to grow. The envelope Keanu had given them still sat proudly on the mantel above the fireplace, untouched but ever present. It wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of possibility, a reminder that dreams could come true even when you least expected it. Margaret often glanced at it while cooking dinner or dusting the shelves, her mind wandering to sandy beaches and turquoise waters. Harold, too, found himself daydreaming about sitting under palm trees with a tropical drink in hand, his arm draped casually around Margaret's shoulders. But for now, they chose to savor the anticipation, letting the excitement build slowly like the first snowfall of the season. One chilly afternoon, as Margaret folded laundry in the living room, she decided it was time to start planning their trip. She retrieved the envelope from the mantel and carefully opened it again, her fingers tracing the edges of the gift card inside. "Harold," she called out, her voice tinged with excitement. "Let's look at some places today, just see what's out there." Harold emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "You sure?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought we agreed not to rush." "We're not rushing," Margaret replied with a playful smile. "We're exploring. There's a difference." Together they settled onto the couch, laptops balanced precariously on their knees. For hours they scrolled through websites showcasing resorts, beaches, and activities in Hawaii. Each image seemed more breathtaking than the last. Crystal clear waves lapping against white sand, lush green mountains rising dramatically into the sky, and sunsets painting the horizon in hues of gold and pink. Margaret leaned closer to Harold, pointing excitedly at pictures of luau's and snorkeling adventures. "Imagine seeing sea turtles up close," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with childlike wonder. Harold chuckled, shaking his head in amazement. "You'd think we were 20 years younger the way you're talking," he teased, though his own enthusiasm matched hers. "But I'll admit, it does sound incredible." As they narrowed down their options, they began making lists. Things to pack, places to visit, meals to try. The process brought back memories of their early travels together, before responsibilities and routines took over. They laughed, recalling how Harold had once gotten lost driving through unfamiliar streets, or how Margaret had insisted on packing half the house because she was convinced they'd forget something important. Those trips may have been simpler, camping, trips or weekend getaways, but they were filled with the same sense of adventure and discovery. Their plans soon became the talk of the neighborhood. Friends and neighbors stopped by frequently, eager to hear updates and offer suggestions. "Make sure you go to Maui," one advised. "The beaches are paradise." Another recommended a luau, where dancers performed traditional hula under the stars. Even their grandchildren joined in, sending links to online articles and videos about Hawaiian culture. Margaret and Harold soaked it all in, grateful for the support and shared excitement. Finally, after weeks of research and deliberation, they booked their flights and accommodations. The confirmation email arrived late one evening, and Margaret read it aloud to Harold, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're really doing it," she whispered, clutching the printout to her chest. "We're going to Hawaii." In the months leading up to their departure, Margaret and Harold prepared meticulously. They purchased new swimsuits, packed sunscreen and wide-brimmed hats, and even attended a travel seminar hosted by a local agency. Every detail was handled with care, yet they couldn't shake the feeling that no amount of preparation could fully capture what awaited them. This trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a celebration of 50 years of love, resilience, and unwavering commitment. The day of their flight arrived sooner than expected, and as they stood on the porch waving goodbye to their neighbors, Margaret felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. "What if we forgot something?" she fretted, glancing at their suitcases piled neatly in the car. Harold chuckled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Even if we did, Maggie, we'll figure it out. That's what we've always done." Their journey to Hawaii was everything they had dreamed of and more. From the moment they stepped off the plane, greeted by warm breezes and fragrant floral leis, they knew they were embarking on an experience unlike any other. They explored lush rainforests, marveled at cascading waterfalls, and snorkeled alongside colorful fish and graceful sea turtles. At sunset, they strolled along the beach, their footprints disappearing with each incoming wave, and watched the sky transform into a canvas of fiery colors. On their final evening in Hawaii, Margaret and Harold sat side by side on a secluded stretch of sand, the sound of the ocean providing a soothing backdrop. Margaret rested her head on Harold's shoulder, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Do you remember that night at the diner?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the gentle crash of the waves. "Of course I do," Harold replied, his tone reflective. "It feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?" Margaret nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes I wonder if it really happened, if Keanu walking into our lives was real. But then I look at this." She gestured toward the vast expanse of ocean before them. "And I know it did. Because here we are, living a dream we never thought possible." Harold wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "You know what I think?" he said after a pause. "I think people like Keanu, they remind us that the world is still full of good. And maybe, just maybe, moments like that happen to show us that we deserve happiness too." Margaret smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Well, if that's true, then I'm glad it happened to us. Because tonight, right here, looking at this beautiful sunset with you, I feel happier than I ever thought I could be." As the stars began to twinkle overhead, casting a soft glow across the beach, Margaret and Harold sat in silence, holding hands tightly. Their 50th anniversary had started with uncertainty and worry, but it had ended with joy, gratitude, and a renewed appreciation for the life they had built together. Though their journey home would bring them back to their cozy little house and familiar routines, they knew one thing for certain. Their love had grown stronger, their bond deeper, and their hearts fuller. And as they boarded the plane the next morning, carrying souvenirs and memories that would last a lifetime, they couldn't help but feel that their story was far from over. After all, love like theirs, a love tested by time, strengthened by challenges, and celebrated with kindness, was a story meant to inspire generations to come.